Unmuted. How about that? Good morning, everyone. For those who may be watching via Facebook Live or YouTube, I'm Pastor Girley, and we're continuing on our month-long study of Africa's contribution to the Bible. This is session 4. This particular session focuses on Africa's contribution to the spread of the gospel, to the expansion of the church. As you've already seen by now, the full and complete story of Africa's involvement, not just in the church or the Bible, but in the world and its development, evolution, has been largely untold, strategically suppressed. And so when we get to this last piece of it that relates to Africa's contribution to the spread of the gospel, to the building up of the church, we will see the same continuing pattern of suppression, distortion, reimagination strategically to elevate the European model and to play down Africa's involvement other than as a student of the Europeans. So by way of review, if you recall, session 1, the most important thing that we learned is that we are all Africans, every one of us. We are all the descendants of Adam and Eve. The Bible tells us that. In Acts chapter 17, Paul confirms that again, of one blood we have all come into existence. But in the 21st century, particularly in the last 20 years with genetic mapping, they've been able to actually tell us where the original human beings lived, and that is on the east coast of Africa, which is today referred to as the African Rift Valley. Some of the nations that we may recognize that are near or at or surrounding this place would be Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, or as they say it, Tanzania, and then all the way up to modern day Ethiopia, Eritrea. If you recall, in session 1, we talked about this remarkable woman who genetic scientists refer to as mitochondria Eve. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the human cell. Through extraction of mitochondria from the skull of a woman that was found in a cave in North Ethiopia, they were able to determine that she is the most common recent ancestor of all living human beings. We also saw that in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, when the Bible is talking about the Garden of Eden, it mentions that there's a river in Eden. There was a river, and when the river exited the garden, it divided into 4 sub-rivers. 2 of those rivers we observed are located in Africa. One we were pretty confident is the Nile River, the other we're not certain of, but that second river was actually a river that ran through Haivala. Haivala is a place at or near the Horn of Africa, what we know today again as Ethiopia and Eritrea. So, wow, how far do you have to go into the Bible before Africa comes up? First book, second chapter, we talked about that. We talked about the fact that Joseph was sent to Africa. Joseph was sent to Kemet. We discussed that the Egyptians that we call Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, did not refer to themselves as Egyptians. That is a Greek rendering of that country. We discussed the fact that generally when people are trying to control, one group of people is trying to control another group of people, one of the ways that they do it is by changing their names. So the Egyptians that we call Egyptians refer to themselves or their country as Kemet. We saw that that's consistent with what is actually in the book of Genesis, chapter 10, the Table of Nations. We saw that Kemet is a derivative of Cam, because that is how the Kemetic people refer to themselves, as being descendants of Ham. And even our European brothers who have not been so generous to Black people historically admit and acknowledge that, in fact, the Black people descended from Ham, which is the third son of Noah. But again, we are all Africans. And we saw that Joseph married an African woman named Asenath, and that from that union, 2 children were born, Manasseh and Ephraim. So when we talk about our construction or our understanding of who Israel is, we came to the understanding that very early on, people of African descent was intermingled and inbred in and lived with and intermarried with the people that we know today as the Jews or the Hebrews or the descendants of Abraham. We saw also that Moses, there's just no dispute about it. He married a Cushite woman. The Bible referred to her as an Ethiopian woman, but when you go into the original language, it's Cushite. And we also discovered that Cush equals black. I showed you in the text, or in the breaking down of the original language, that Cush equals black. We talked about the fact that many of the pharaohs were black, but certainly the 25th dynasty, which is not talked about much at all in world history, the 25th dynasty of Egypt was a group of individuals that were members of one family that came up from the empire of Kush, which is just south of Kemet, and controlled it for over 100 years or thereabout, ruled and set up black pharaohs on the thrones and built tombs and monuments in the same way as all other pharaohs. Now, one other thing, and then we'll get to today's information. We raised the question of how is it that different people look differently? In other words, the people in Africa look pretty dark, but the people who lived in places like Norway, which is perhaps the furthest point from the equator, why are they so fair? Well, the genetic scientists told us the reason for that. They said that when humanity began at its origin, we were near the equator. And as we all know, the sun's rays are the most potent and powerful, and it's hottest at near the equator, so you need protection. Melanin is God's protection, God's armor to his creation. We made that observation because throughout the European presentation of Christianity, when they wanted to justify the enslavement and the oppression of people from Africa, one of the things that they did was said that Black people were cursed, and one of the badges of our inferiority was our skin color. But now, because we've gone through these sessions and this lesson or this course, we know that actually this dark skin that we are in, for those of us who are African-American, Black, who are listening, it is everything but a curse. It is God's favor and his protection. It's internal armor. That's literally what it is. It's armor. And it's the best kind of armor. And you don't have to buy it at the drugstore and wipe it on and hope that it don't rinse off or fade, because it's in us. But as we moved away, as we showed you the migration map at the very beginning, as human beings moved away, they needed less armor because they were less exposed to the sun. So now that brings us to our final session, session 4. And we want to talk about, did Africa play a role in the development out the gate of Christianity? As is our normal custom, I will give you, pardon me, the Bible first. I will read certain passages that I think are relevant. And then secondarily, I will give you the secular and the historical sources that support what the Bible is telling us. As always, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and just come on in. This is a participatory discussion. I love the questions. I love the comments. If you don't want your voice to be heard, then by all means, just put your question in the chat, and someone will let me know to look through the chat, and we'll raise the question that way. We want you to feel comfortable, not trying to put anyone on the spot. Listen, the past three lectures is now up on YouTube. If you want to tell others about it, I had the privilege of sitting with Brian's church in New York City, Connection Church, and I tried to compress all the information that I've been sharing with you all in 1 hour conversation with questions. If you want to see that, you can go to the Connection Church on Facebook, the Connection Church of New York City. We talk about the things that we've been discussing for the entire month of February in appreciation and celebration of Black history. Now, having blabbed enough, let's go to our text. Let me first of all share my screen. One day I'm gonna get this. And now, see if I can get you where I am. Can you see my outline now? All right, I'm getting better. So you see we're on session 4, Africa's role in the spread of Christianity. Well, let's start where we have this, at a place where we've discussed previously. And that is Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8, verse 27. Let me back up to another verse, 26. And the angel of the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, Arise and go toward the south unto the way that goeth down from Jerusalem unto Gaza, which is desert. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, and a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of her treasure and had come to Jerusalem for to worship. Now, I want to stop there because there's a lot in that statement. If you recall, by way of review, when the Bible used the term Ethiopia, it's not talking about the nation that we know today as Ethiopia, right? But rather about Africa in general, sub-Saharan Africa specifically. So when you look at this person, who is this person? If you research it all the way out, he's an African. He's a Black African. Remember last week, we talked about the Kandakes, the Candaces. Verse 27 talks about Candace. Candace is not her name. Candace is her function, her title. She's and Candace is the Greek rendering of the name of the Cushite name or Cushite title, Kandake, the queen. So this guy, he's there, but it's interesting to note that he's a sub-Saharan African. He's black, but he's in Jerusalem worshiping. So what that tells us is that there was a connection. Even before the birth of Christ, there was a connection between Israel and the African people, that there was African people who had adopted the Jewish faith, Jewish religion. And that's the point that you have to see in verse 27. Now then, let's go on to verse 28. Was returning and sitting in his chariot, he read Isaiah the prophet, which is Isaiah the prophet. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. Then the Spirit said unto Philip, Go near and join thyself to this chariot. And Philip ran thither to him and heard him read the prophet Isaiah, which is again Isaiah, and said, Understandest thou what thou readest? And he said, How can I, except some man should guide me? And he desired Philip that he would come up and sit with him. The place of the scriptures which he read was this: He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and like a lamb dumb before his shearer so opened he not his mouth. In his humiliation, his judgment was taken away. And who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. And the eunuch answered Philip and said, I pray thee, of whom speaketh the prophet this? Of himself or of some other man? Then Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture and preached unto him who? Jesus. So when did the first African people, if no other place that we can find, when did they first begin to learn about Jesus? Well, this is like a couple of years at the most, maybe not even that, after the death of Christ. This is not in bondage, in slavery, in sometime after 1492, when Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovered the America. This is right out of the gate. And this is by design. God had a plan to get the gospel of Jesus Christ into Africa immediately. What we see here is a supernatural occurrence. Verse 36. And as they went on their way, they came unto a certain water, and the eunuch said, see, here is water. What doth hinder me to be baptized? And Philip said, if thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still. And they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch. And he baptized him. And when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more. And he went on his way rejoicing. Where did he go? He went back home. Where? Back to Africa. Where? Ethiopia? Maybe. Kush? Probably. But when we talk about Ethiopia and Kush, please understand that there wasn't always these hard boundaries in the way that we see boundaries between nations today. It was a floating boundary. So yes, we know that he went somewhere to either Kush or to what we know today as modern day Ethiopia. Do you think by any chance that he might have shared his experience with the Kandake? Very likely. You think that if he had a family, or he was a eunuch, so he didn't have a family, but he had people that answered to him, people that looked up to him. Do you think perhaps maybe he shared the good news of the gospel to those people? Very likely. Okay. Now I want to get back to going back to sharing the screen, because there's more in the outline that I need to show you. Share my screen one more time. We're back to the outline on the screen. All right, great. Now then, that's not the only experience that I think you need to see. Often when we think about how the gospel was shared in terms of from the Black people, or from the Europeans to the Blacks, it's always been one of the white people bringing the Black people to the marvelous light. When I was doing the lecture the other day at the Connection Church, a question came up in terms of, why is it important to talk about Africa's contribution as opposed to just other people or people in general? And another question came up, what prompted you to do this study? One of the things that I neglected to say initially was that what I've seen a lot of among the educated, highbrow, woke, enlightened young Black people today is this notion that Christianity is the white man's religion. And I hope that those of you who have participated in this course understand that it's kind of impossible to say that when you go back and you look at how Africa is mentioned in the passages from Genesis on all the way out. What is true about what our young African-American woke brothers and sisters are saying is the presentation of Christianity perhaps is European. And it has been presented as consistent and the only way to think of God and the only way to approach Christianity. And to the extent that our young Black brothers and sisters and whoever else rejects that notion or that narrow construction of the scriptures, I would agree with it. But I want to get to some historical information because I think that it's important for you to see this in scripture in terms of who was sharing the gospel with whom. First, can you see Acts chapter 11, verse 20? All right, you can't see it yet? I thought I did. Let me just try to do it again. Stop sharing. Come back to it. Share it again. Share. How about now? All right. So now this is important. This is Acts chapter 11. So at some point in the church history, the church was persecuted. And the result of the persecution of the church is that it spread out. It left Jerusalem and they went in all different directions. And now this is verse 19 of chapter 11. Now they were scattered abroad upon the persecution that arose about Stephen, traveled as far as Phoenice and Cyprus and Antioch, preaching the word, none but unto the Jews only. And some of them were men from Cyprus and Cyrene, which when they were come to Antioch, spake unto the Grecians, preaching the Lord Jesus Christ. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number believed and turned unto the Lord. Now, why that is important, ladies and gentlemen, is because if you know who the Cyrenians are, you know that that's people from North Africa, okay? So what we have is Africans going into a certain region and preaching the gospel to Greeks. It's always been in the Bible. You've never had it, or probably, maybe you haven't, probably has never been emphasized in any Bible study that you've attended, but it's there, it's clearly there. You've got Black people actually preaching the gospel to white people in the first century of the church. So it's hard, it becomes increasingly more difficult for us to say that Christianity is a religion that was foisted upon us or forced on us by white people. Now, one more time, I have one more passage of scripture that I want to take you to, and then we'll be done in terms of the scriptures, and then we'll go to our secular source. Are you able to see the scripture right now? No. Okay, I'll have to do my old one and done again. All right, how about now? Is it Acts chapter 13? All right. Acts chapter 13, verse 1. What you need to know historically is that this is still the first century. This is fairly recent in terms of, I don't even know if it's been a year or two at the most where Christ has been crucified. So we're talking AD 35, 36, 37 generously, but still within the first century, still very close. The death of Christ and the establishment of the church is still very new. It's Acts chapter 13, verse 1. Now there were in the church that was at Antioch, because the first base of the Christian church was Jerusalem. The second base of the church in the world in its entirety was Antioch. Now let's see who was involved in the church at Antioch. We're going to read this. Now there was in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene. And we just read about Cyrene in the 11th chapter, and we know that that is actually an African place. It's a either a state or what would be comparable to a state, or actually a country, a place for sure, a geographical place on the continent of Africa. So we see Lucius is from Cyrene, but we see also Simon, who was called Niger. Now that word Niger, again, in fact, I think I'll go to the tools and just click on that one name so you can get some understanding, because in the Bible, names meant something. Today, we call our kids names that really don't mean anything, I mean, for the most part. But the name Niger, can you see that? See my cursor? All right, that's all I want to show you. So in the second base or at the second base of the church, which is Antioch, which is in Asia Minor, you've got a gathering or a collection of different prophets and teachers, and at least two of them are Black, Simon and Lucius. So here again, now in terms of this notion that Christianity was forced on us in slavery, the door is just closing, to just we just gotta it's barely open, okay? But let me take a moment now and treat this question or this subject of why I think people believe that Christianity was a white man's religion, because I think it's important. And this is just to understand the human condition. And I'll just take Judaism, because if you study history, and we're not doing it because for time's sake, but if you study Judaism all the way out, you see that wherever the Jewish faith went, if it was in Jerusalem, it was practiced differently than in Rome. And because the Romans put their ethnic flavor to it. It didn't make it wrong, it didn't make it right, it's human behavior. And Islam, the type of Islam that is practiced in Saudi Arabia is not even the same type of Islam that is practiced in Qatar, which is very close, and is certainly not the same type of Islam. I mean, there's some core tenets that all are expected to observe, but in terms of how it is completely fleshed out, it just looks differently. And I would suggest to you that when Christianity was being spread across the globe, as it went to the different places, it came, if you can imagine this, as a skeleton, right? And I'll give you some scriptural reference. I won't read it for time's sake, but I'll talk to you about it because I think it's important. For reference, I'm going to tell you something, then I want you to write this down and you can go back and read it later. But if you recall, in the 15th chapter of the book of Acts, that was the first conference or gathering of all the church leaders to try to flesh out some doctrine, because you had the Jews who were saying, in addition to believing on Christ, you have to be circumcised, you have to observe the Sabbath, you have to abstain from eating pork and other meats. And there was a great controversy about this. And so they called a meeting in Jerusalem to see what would be the result, whether or not the new Greek converts would have to fully comply and fully comport with the provisions of the law of Moses. And at the end of the day, what they said is that it seems good to us and to the Holy Ghost that these simple things, if you will do these basically 4 things, that you're going to be all right. The rest you can figure out. That you obviously abstain from worshiping other gods, that you abstain from sexual perversion of any sort, fornication, adultery, that you abstain from eating meats that have been offered to gods. And there was one other admonishment. There were 4, I believe. But the point simply is this, that in addition to believing on Christ, there were 4 simple things that the new converts had to observe. But over the years, as Christianity has traveled and evolved to different nations, other nations and other cultures has put in the other stuff. And as it relates to Europe, they put it in with the weight and the authority to suggest that in order to be fully Christianized, you had to embrace their cultural expressions of Christianity. I'm going to do a little illustration with my hand. If you think about my 4 fingers as being a skeleton, the way that religion should work, the way that in reading Acts chapter 15, I think carefully what the apostles was saying to the new Greek converts and what the Lord himself was saying, because they said it seemed good to us and to the Holy Ghost, was that religion puts up a skeletal framework. Culture comes in and meshes with that, and now we've got a union. It's this, there's a mesh. But what happens very often is that Christianity, when it was presented to certain people that the Europeans considered to be savages, here's the culture, here's the European form of Christianity, they're coming in and they're doing this. They're saying to be fully Christian means you must be like us in how we perceive and how we construe Christ and the dictates of the faith. I think to the extent that our young Black brothers and sisters are rejecting that, or whoever is rejecting that, I think that they're spot on point. And we need to recognize that, those of us that have been in the church for a long time, that European culture and Christianity are not one and the same. And let me come at this from the reverse. What the Europeans often did when they were quote unquote spreading the gospel is that they would demonize the culture of the indigenous people. So everything that was foreign to them was of the devil. No. That's not truth. That's not the truth that we can establish when we read the scriptures carefully. So I wanted to get to that because I think it's important. Authentic Christianity does not require us to abandon all of our culture. In fact, it is designed to interact with our culture. There is some requirement that we abandon aspects of our culture if those things are completely and clearly in contradiction to God's word. And his prescriptions that are clearly laid out. So we have to be able to distinguish between what is culture and what is Christianity. And in the presentation of the gospel in the United States of America, there has certainly been a conflation of the two and confusion about that. So now let me get back to the outline. I want to share the screen again, get back to the outline. Can you see the outline? Now we're on the secular record. I've given you scriptures to show you that the Christians, that Black people, Africans were involved out of the gate. I don't think that is disputable. All right, now, I told you in past class, I'm on subs point A now, that we use the term Ethiopia, but the people that are referred to as Ethiopians did not use that term. That is a Greek term that means the land of the burnt-faced people. So to the extent that we don't consider ourselves burnt-faced people, Black, ugly, all the things that we talked about in session 1, I don't know. It may not necessarily be a proper reference, but let's go to subpoint B. Because we've dealt with the Bible. Now I want to deal with what is called the oral traditions, and particularly these oral traditions hold in the current nation of Ethiopia. It is taught, it is written in their records, in their historical records, and in their church records that Matthew, one of the as in the Gospel of Matthew, that at some point Matthew actually traveled to Ethiopia to preach the gospel. that he did that at some point during the first century. It is also reported that Mark established, as in the one who wrote the book, the Gospel of Mark, he established a church in Alexandria. And in fact, I read that again last night, that he became the first bishop of the church that was in Alexandria, Egypt, or as we've been discussing from the beginning, Kemet. So we've got two of Christ's apostles or disciples in Africa in the first century. There again, we've got Africans learning and being converted to Christianity in the first century. And that is the point. Just for your reference, just so you can see where I'm getting this information from. Do you see this article? I've got to go back and click out and click back in. I'm gonna get there. Share. What do you see now? Saint Mark the Apostle was the founder of the Coptic Church, and by way of review, if you don't know what, whenever you hear or see the term Coptic, that means Egyptian. Okay. I don't want to read it because we're trying to get through the material. We got a lot to do today, but you should know that the apostles were in Africa. Now, what did Jesus tell his apostles or his disciples, which is commonly referred to as the Great Commission? He said, go forth, right, and do what? Teach and preach the gospel and make disciples of all men. Start in Jerusalem and Judea, and then do what? Go to the uttermost parts of the earth. So, but very often when the story is told, it's told as though Jesus sent his disciples and his followers to all of Israel and then to Europe exclusively. And then he tasked Europe with spreading the gospel to everyone else. When in the oral traditions, some of his disciples not only traveled to Africa, which I've showed you, Matthew and Mark, but also to India, to China, all as far as China. So the disciples, in other words, they did what Christ told them to do. They preached the gospel in Jerusalem and Judea and throughout Israel, and then they spread out. So there's some consistency and some agreement in terms of the fact that this gospel this faith that we practice was not just spread by one group of people, but it was spread by the disciples, and then it began to make its way naturally, taking on the cultural expressions of each nation that it spread to. And there's nothing unholy about that. And in fact, it's something very natural and normal about that. But we haven't known, and we haven't really heard of how Christianity developed and evolved in Africa. It just has not been a focus. I'm back on my outline. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. Now, let me go on now. I asked some of you, actually the last thing that I said in our last lesson was by way of a homework assignment. I wanted you to look at the nation of Aksum. Did anyone do that? Besides Brooke, who's heard me talk about it multiple times.
I looked up some of it.
Okay, so tell me what you discovered about it, sir.
Aksum consisted of North Ethiopia, Yemen, southern Saudi Arabia, northern Sudan, with Ethiopia. How you pronounce that?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. I was in your last class. I just had to be doing my research.
Okay.
But, yeah, but I just found that those were the areas that was considered Aksum at that period. And then, they were very, how you say, controlling a trade between Persia, Russia, and Rome during that time.
So that's the point right there, okay? And by the way, if you want to know more about Aksum, Henry Louis Gates is a professor of African American Studies at Harvard University. He produced a documentary on the lost kingdoms or civilizations of Africa, and he featured Aksum in this documentary. And what struck me about Aksum was that it was a Christian empire. The rest of them were either just empires that were formed by kings who embraced the indigenous traditional religions of Africa and or Islam. Many of them were Islamic kings, but Aksum started out being a traditional African empire, but at its apex and at its zenith, it was Christian. And I'm now at subpoint C on our outline. The contemporaries of the empire of Aksum said that it was in its day equal in power and influence to Persia, to Rome, and to China. The empire existed for 1,000 years. How many of you, by way of just comments, have heard of or learned about Aksum in your world history classes growing up or in your college courses? Anyone?
Not me.
How can a nation that existed, an empire that existed for 1,000 years and be as powerful as Persia, Rome, and China not be known to Black people? A Christian empire. And the story is this, that Azana converted to Christianity in the year 333 AD. Now, people differ. Some say earlier, some say later, but the point is somewhere around there. The one emperor who is celebrated as being the first emperor to convert to Christianity is Constantine of Rome. But if you read the story of Constantine all the way out, he really never converted. He only got baptized on his deathbed. His mother was a Christian and his father was a pagan, and he worshiped other gods. But when he was on the verge of a very important battle, a vision appeared to him speaking about Constantine, and he saw the symbol of the cross, and in the vision, a voice said to him, "Conquer under this symbol. Conquer, go forth in this name." And he went forth and conquered, and he won the battle. And so from that point forward, he decriminalized Christianity, because prior to that, Christianity was not an authorized religion of Rome. I think what's commonly mistaken when this story is told is that all of Rome converted to Christianity at that point. The reality is that Christianity became decriminalized and it was allowed to be observed along with other religions. And I want to contrast that to Ezana's conversion. Ezana was the son of an Ethiopian king or Aksumite king. And Ezana's father bought 2 slaves from Syria, Frumentius. Frumentius was a Syrian Christian. Frumentius was a slave in Ezana's house when Ezana was a child. And at some point, Ezana's father died when he was still a boy. Ezana's mother, the queen, asked Frumentius to stay on and to continue to tutor, to teach Ezana the sciences and the maths and all of the learning of that day. And so Frumentius, who's again a Syrian, agreed to do that. But along with the science and the math, Frumentius taught and preached to Ezana the Bible, Jesus Christ. And when Ezana became the king, he converted to Christianity. Now, Aksum is just a brilliant and beautiful place. I strongly encourage you to look into this country. A couple of weeks back, Sister Tanja talked about the fact that what we're talking about is the real Wakanda. Well, I would say that Azana was the real T'Challa, in my thinking. And in fact, when I was looking at all of the information about this guy, he was the real deal. He spoke and read 3 different languages. He spoke and read Greek. He wrote it. He spoke and he read Zabian, which is Arabic. He read it. He spoke it. He wrote it. He spoke and he read Giz or Gaz, which is the original language of the Ethiopian people or the Aksumite people. And we know this because he put up what are called stelas or monuments in which he documented his various different battles that he had with the surrounding people, such as the Nubian people to the north. And he talked about one particular battle where he, by the power of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, so what he puts in this monument, was able to overcome and to defeat his opponent. He took the coinage, because they had gold coins at that time, and there used to be, prior to him converting to Christianity, there used to be on one side the image of the emperor, and on the other side the crescent, which was a symbol of their religion at the time. He took the crescent off of their gold coins and he put on their coins the cross. So the conversion of Aksum and Azana stands in sharp contrast to the alleged conversion of Constantine. I'm not trying to play down Constantine. I'm just playing up Azana because he was the real deal. And he encouraged his people from the high point of society to the lowest point of society to embrace Christianity, and they did. And from that point unto this point, right now, as in what's today's date, February the 28th, 2021, Ethiopia is a Christian nation today. And it goes all the way back to Azana. Now, what we also know from history, and I'm doing some summary because I want you to get the information, and this is just teaser information for you to go and read further. We know that in 1898, the European colonial powers met, I believe in Berlin, it might not have been Berlin, but somewhere in Europe, for the purpose of deciding which colonial power was going to have which region or which country of Egypt, or rather of Africa. And the entire continent was carved up. And then they began to rule. And the reason why they were there was to exploit the natural resources. Africa is, as I said in other sessions, it is, in terms of natural resources, it is the wealthiest continent. But in terms of the per capita income and wealth and resources of its citizens, they're the poorest people on planet Earth. And conversely, I said that Europe, in terms of natural resources, is one of the poorest continents, if not the poorest continent, but the people proportionately are the richest. Why? Because they've taken stuff from Africa, they've taken stuff from India, they've taken stuff from the Americans and brought it back to Europe. Now, on another conversation, on another day, when we talk about reparations, the reason why no one wants reparations to get started in the United States of America, because if the door of reparations is open, it's not going to stay just, the conversation is not going to be limited to America. The conversation is going to be addressing Europe's debt to the whole world, because Europe stole from the entire world, took from the whole world, oppressed the whole world, and used religion, Christianity, as a club to beat people into subjection. And largely, in the context of this conversation, people who look like you and me, Black people, told us that we were cursed, that we were under the Hamitic curse, that our Black skin was God's expression of disfavor and disapproval toward us. And through this course, we've debunked all of that. Hopefully you've learned these things, and hopefully I've whet your appetite, and you've simply gone beyond me. And so next time you and I get together and discuss this, you'll be able to share some information with me about some additional things that you learn. But getting back to Ethiopia, though, because I think it's important. When Europe carved up and thereafter by brute force of their armies, their technologically advanced armies, went in and began to take all of the African people's resources and their land, there was one exception to that. There was one nation that was never, ever, ever colonialized by Europe. Now, anyone want to guess what nation that was?
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Ethiopia. So there's just so much that we don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. Ethiopia, or Aksum, was a powerful empire. The last couple of weeks we focused on Kemet, powerful. You know, I am continuing to add to my base of knowledge, and I would challenge and encourage you to do the same. But one of the things that I learned just last night when I was just chilling, further adding to my information, my knowledge, that the beginning of astronomy, which we talked about to some degree, how that the Egyptians were versed in science, religion, medicine, philosophy, but astronomy, the Egyptians or the Kemetic people weren't the first ones to perfect that. They found in the middle of the Saharan desert a site where the ancient Africans and the scientists believe that this site is 9,000 years old. They found where they set up this basically a calendar of stones to track the constellations of the stars, and how it was precise, it was accurate. 9,000 years ago, you had Africans who were doing astronomical observations in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But of course, then it was not the Sahara Desert, as we discussed before. 9,000 years ago, what we know today as the Sahara Desert was an oasis. Climate change, or the heating up of that particular region, it became hyper arid, and all the vegetation died, and that's what caused them to move east toward the Nile Valley. But 9,000 years ago, they were making these scientific observations. They were setting up the science that we use today to get to the moon, that we used 2 weeks ago to get to planet Mars. These Africans were doing this 9,000 years ago. And the lecture that I was listening to was being given by an astrophysicist. And what he said was, look, he wasn't particularly religious. He didn't have a dog in the fight. He heard that there was this discovery, and he traveled to Africa to make the observation, to do some measurements himself, to see whether or not this calendar formation, this astrological chart that they created with stones in the middle of the desert, whether or not it comported with what their understanding of the stars is today, and it was spot on. And I'm trying to think of what the guy's name is. His last name is Trophy or Brophy, I think. But if you want to know more about that, it's called The Genesis of Civilization, or The Genesis of Africa. If you look him up, and I could be totally botching his name because I just came across that information last night. But it's consistent with everything that we've taught so far, that we've learned so far in this course, that if we go all the way back to the fact that the original people were living, the original human beings were living somewhere near the Great Lake region in Southeast Africa, and they began to migrate north. And they began to follow the flow or the path of the Nile River. And as they traveled north, they built towns and villages, and they developed science and they made observations. And when they reached Egypt or Kemet, they had got to a place or a zenith or an apex of learning. And so all of that was a manifestation and accumulation of knowledge that had been gathered and accumulated over a period of thousands of years. But we just don't know what we just don't know. And now that we do know this, we really can't fairly and accurately refer to Africa as the dark continent. Let me go back and share my screen one more time. And then we're actually sadly coming to the end of our lecture or our course. Let me come out of that though. Let's try it one more time. I'm in the wrong screen. All right. I'll try it one more time. There it is. Can you see my screen? Mm-hmm. So I've talked about Azana because I think he's a very powerful, very inspirational person. I've talked about the fact that Cush, and first of all, I talked about the fact that Mizraim, Cush, they were brothers. They were brothers. They were the descendants of brothers. So they fought. They traded with each other. They intermarried with each other. But if Tanja is on, listen, when you think about Wakanda, I want you to think about Kemet, Cush, and Aksum together. Powerful, technologically advanced, civilized. You were taught that these Africans for thousands of years were groping around in the darkness in grass skirts and living in huts. Some of them certainly did. But you didn't know about Azana, who was speaking Greek and writing Greek and speaking Ge'ez and writing Ge'ez. You weren't taught that. And the Kushite people also had their own language and they had their own writing. What it was called the Meridix Script. Cush had three periods that were times when they were at their apex. The first was Kerma, that was the first settlement, which is just south of the border of Egypt, Kerma. The third was Napata, and then the fourth was Merowe. And Merowe, for those of you who may be thinking one day of traveling to Africa to further investigate, you should know that there are more pyramids in Merowe than there are in Egypt in its entirety. Roughly, the Kushite people, particularly in Merowe, have twice as many pyramids as the Egyptians, but you've never heard of that. But when you finish this session today, if you will simply Google pyramids and Merowe, and Merowe is not spelled, it's almost like, it's M-E-R-O-E. So that would appear to be Maro, but Merowe is a place that is very interesting. They developed iron and ore. Some people have referred to Merowe as the Birmingham of Africa. It was technologically advanced. Interestingly, what brought Cush finally into declination was the struggles that they had and the wars that they had with Azana. Azana writes about his struggles and wars against the Kushite people. But again, between Egypt and Cush and Aksum, they loved and they hated each other. They fought, they traded with each other. And Brother Nate, and I see that there's a comment in the chat. I'm going to come to that in just a moment. Oh, okay. Brother Nate, what made Aksum so powerful was they controlled trade along the Red Sea. And at the very narrowest point, at the southernmost point of the Red Sea, where Africa is divided from Asia from Saudi Arabia or Yemen by just a narrow slither of water, they set up their forces, and basically they charge tolls for people to enter and to leave. And they got paid. And they were powerful. And they had the army and the navy to enforce it. And we know that they traded as far away as with people in China, because in Aksum, they found fine Chinese plates, cups, glasses, and things like that. And similarly, in India, they found some of those gold coins from Aksum with the cross on them. So we know that these people, in the words of Phyllis' first cousin, they was doing the darn thing. They was getting it done. They're not celebrated because it doesn't fit in with the overall narrative that Europe wanted to have of us. By contrast, can you see my screen? Okay, one last time here. How about now? So basically, if you read this article, do y'all know who the Anglo-Saxons are? Anyone? Can someone tell me who the Anglo-Saxons are? Someone said white people. Can you give me a little bit more information?
Those are British, Irish, I guess you would say Northern European descent.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a moment. The Anglos and the Saxons are Germanic tribes. German. That's the root word, German. The country of Germany is the origins is that there were several tribes that existed, thousands of years ago, collectively referred to as the Germanic tribes. The Anglos was one of them, by the way, okay? And the Saxons was another. At some point, the Anglos and the Saxons got together, but they were both Germanic tribes. The Vandals, you've heard of the Vandals, right? The Vandals were rough. They would go in and destroy stuff and take stuff. And in fact, we have a term that we use today in our language to refer to going all the way back to that Germanic tribe. And the root word is they were the Vandals. What do we know about vandalism? Well, that comes right from the history of who these people are. So these were unchurched people. These were people who were considered to be pagans. And yes, the Anglos and the Saxons actually at some point invaded Britain, because the Brits were a separate people from the Anglos and the Saxons. And the Anglos and the Saxons, who were a Germanic tribe, came in and took over. But it wasn't until, I just want to point one thing out. The only reason why I show you this, you can read this later, but you see when they converted to Christianity, you see that date? 597 AD. Now, when was it that I said that Azana and all of Ethiopia converted to Christianity?
333.
333 AD. Can you see what the point that I'm making here? No, the point is simply this: to say that the only way that Black people became Christians is that it was through Europe. It's just not true. Azana was worshiping God and giving glory to God for the battles that he won, telling his entire nation, you need to seek God's face and you need to believe in Jesus. He was doing that at 333 AD, long before these Germanic people actually came to the saving knowledge of who Jesus is. And we need to understand that, because that further closes the door on the conclusion that Christianity is something for white people, and it's not familiar or historical in terms of our religious expression. It is very much so. And I just happen to believe in my heart and mind This is a girlyism, and I think I told you at the beginning of this course what I mean when I say girlyism. I'm not saying this dogmatically. You don't have to believe me. You can disagree with me on this. But I happen to think that there is a direct connection between the fact that Ethiopia converted to Christianity and stayed with Christianity as all the other African nations around them were converting to Islam. I happen to think that because they did that, that there's a direct connection between that and the fact that they were never colonized by, I'll get it out sooner or later, colonized by Europe. I think that they were afforded divine protection, okay, by God, and that they still are. And that one of the last things I was trying to get to in my lesson, and I just added it last night, I tell you, I promise you. And then what I want to do is allow you some time to make some comments. So let me stop sharing that. Let me go back to trying to share my outline one more time, because I just added one more thing that I think is so important. Kingdom of Aksum. And again, you guys have the outlines with the links. I encourage you to, for the fuller knowledge, I encourage you strongly to go to the lesson. I added so much. I can't even keep up with what I added. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm gonna stop looking for it. But what it is, though, is an article about when the Catholic Church, which was the first church, by the way, when you use the term Catholic, please understand that Catholicism is not a denomination. Some people think it is. It's not. Martin Luther was a Catholic priest, and he sought to reform the Catholic Church, which was to make it better, to get it back on its moral foundation, because it was off. It was off in the sense that they were selling indulgences, if you know the story. If your son, your daughter, your mother, your father has died and you don't know if they're going to go to heaven or hell, they're in purgatory. For $19.95, we can pray your son, your daughter, your mother, your dog out of hell or out of purgatory into heaven. And so the church was using that literally as a fundraiser, much in the way that some of these televangelists still do foolishness like that today. And Martin Luther comes along and he says, hey guys, this is not biblical. This is heretical, as a matter of fact. This is antithetical to the teachings of the Bible. And they told him, Martin, you need to keep your mouth closed. We got a thing going on, bro. And he wouldn't. And at some point he nailed his 91 theses to the door of the Diet of Worms, and Worms was a town. The Diet was like a council or commission. And when he challenged this practice, and they summoned him and they told him, you're going to have to recant this because you're causing a problem with our fundraising program. They didn't say it exactly that way, but that was the essence of what they said to him. He came and he said, here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. He stood on his principles. And from that, there was a great Reformation. That was the beginning. But it was never Martin Luther's intent to form a separate organization. Now, we know that the Lutheran Church came out of that, but that was not Martin Luther's intent. But when Martin Luther was looking for a model, this is the point that this all kind of goes back to the Ethiopian eunuch, Zana, African Christianity, the beginnings of African Christianity. When Martin Luther was looking for a model that would get the church back on its original moral foundations, and And I challenge you to look this up because it's very, very interesting and certainly never been taught in the classes that I took, as a minister, to become a minister. We learned church history. And I know about Martin Luther, of course, but I didn't hear about this story. I think it's interesting. Martin Luther looked to Africa, okay? And he wrote 85 different times about Ethiopia, that the church in Ethiopia seemed to have the original purity and doctrinal rigor and practice that is most like the Church of Jerusalem. That's what Martin Luther said in his writings. And he said, we can learn, we being the Europeans, being the church, the Catholic Church that was going left in terms of the vernacular of the people. We can learn from those Ethiopians. We can learn from those our elder brethren in the faith. He referred to the African people as the elder brethren in the faith. You ain't never heard that story. Oh, let me not be presumptuous. Is there anyone that's in this class that ever heard that said or heard that story about Martin Luther? And my point in this, and we're coming to the close of our session for today, my point in sharing this story with you is that, if we go all the way back and we treat history fully, what we see is that the learning between European people and African people as it relates to Christianity has been two directional, but at its earliest point, it was the Africans sharing the gospel with the Europeans, not the other way around. We saw that in Acts. That's why we started in Acts today. Now I'm going to open this up for questions or comments. Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments?
Pastor Girley,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can.
First of all, I want to say I really appreciate the study that you have given us the last 4 weeks. Kind of open our eyes. Well, open my eyes at least. I can't speak for everybody else. But I wanted to point something out. I don't know if I said a couple of years ago, if anything I do on Sundays is always watch 60 Minutes. And they did a series, well, not a series, but they did a story about the covenant, the art of the Ark, or Lost Covenant. And they believe they traced it back to Ethiopia. And at the time, a lot of the Europeans were disputing it. So what they did was they took some DNA from the priests who were covering, was supposed to be, they never did see the Ark, but they was supposed to be where the Ark is being kept at. And they took their DNA, and their DNA traced all the way back to Aaron, the Levites. And they indicated that be a Levite, you had to come from the bloodline of Aaron. It wasn't anything that was appointed to you. You had to be within that bloodline, which I found kind of strange. So the covenant was in Ethiopia. And then as I was reading last night, I came across, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Malachi the first, he one of the first.
Menelik the first.
Right. He was
Menelik, I'm sorry.
Menelik the first. He was believed to be the son of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. And exactly. From what I read, it was that he gave, Menelik went to him in Jerusalem, and he refused to stay. So he turned back to Ethiopia. And the story reads that if King Solomon gave him this ark to return back to Ethiopia, and when you're referring to none of the countries in Africa, only one country was not colonized, which was Ethiopia. And if you look at their bloodline of the kings stayed in Ethiopia from Menelik all the way up to King Haile Selassie until his rule. And so we're talking about thousands of years of the same family. But it also, like I said, it kind of made me think about how the ark wound up in Ethiopia. And here you had Europeans now going back, tracing the DNA. And one other point I wanted to make was that when you was talking about culture, I grew up in the Catholic Church. And Apostle Paul was so prominent in the Catholic Church. And it was always told to us that Apostle Paul, God's plan was Apostle Paul was to be captured and taken to Rome so he could spread the word, because Rome was the, control of that world at that time. And so when I converted to a Baptist back in the late 80s, I saw the same thing. We always hear about Apostle Paul because why? Because he came to Rome. And so now that it feeds into what you indicated before about culture. It's whoever's telling the story is going to tell it their way.
Right. And Brother Nate, you made some great observations. And let me just say a few things about what Brother Nate said. So if you look at and I'm going to kill the name of this church, but I'll just say the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. That's the short name for it. Mm-hmm. The Tawahiti Church is the real name, the full name. You should look it up, guys. Again, my purpose for this class today is to encourage you to do further inquiry about who we are and how God has worked through us, that we are not forgotten, that we are not forsaken, that we're not disregarded, that we are actually favored. We're blessed. That here's where Jerry Girley is going to reveal a few things to you. I have a sense, and I won't call myself a prophet, but from time to time, the Lord does speak to me. I have a sense that we're here not to cry about what has happened, but to prepare for something big to come. Just as those Africans thousands of years ago, 9,000 years ago, were learning the universe, studying the stars, putting the foundations in place for astronomy, for medicine. And as they moved, for whatever reason, they took with them the greatness and the knowledge and the information that was deposited in them. In a similar way, we have some stuff that we brought when we came here. Understandably, we weren't planning to be here, but we are here. And there's something that will blow our minds in terms of what God has in mind for us. It's not bad. This is where I go out on the limb. I'm not speaking in terms of my research, my reading, and my scholarship, just by way of revelation. There is something good and wonderful and great that awaits us. And we brought it with us. And we need to be focused going forward on unlocking and releasing and walking in that greatness that has been with us for thousands of years. That's my thought. One of the reasons why this study means so much to me, and as I prepared the material for this study, it blessed me because I understood, more so than I've ever understood, that Africa is a special place. Obviously it is, if it is the birthplace of humanity. Obviously, if it is the continent that has the most natural resources in terms of material wealth, it is the wealthiest continent. Africa is a great place, a wonderful place, a special place, but a much maligned continent. It has been maligned in our minds. We, Black people, we have been taught to despise, to want, however so slightly, to distance ourselves from that continent. I hope that one of the takeaways that you have from as a result of being a part of this course is that you will not hate Africa, not want to distance yourself from Africa, not want to reject Christianity, but to reject mischaracterizations of Christianity, which is what I think, again, the woke population is dealing with. They're rejecting. And then it's an alarm bell to us, those of us who've been in the way or in Christianity all of our lives, that we need to shake loose the unnecessary stuff, the stuff that has been added on that really at the end of the day don't have much to do with what Christianity is. So I need to tell you that a couple of more things that when I was contemplating this study, occasionally I have musical compositions that literally come to me in the middle of the night. And so I'm giving you guys some insight into Jerry Girley that perhaps I've never shared with anyone. Something that my family knows all the time. I'll just be laying down in the middle of the day or middle of the night and a melody will come to me. But as I was preparing for this class, a song entered my heart and mind. I got up in the middle of the night. I took my iPhone, I hummed a few bars, and then I went to my son, the great musician, and I said, "Can you work with this? It's rough, I know, but can you work with it?" And he was gracious enough to put it to music. And I'm going to share it with you right now. Okay, I got his approval in advance. I talked with him this morning and he said that it was okay. But I'm going to give you the words first, okay? I'm going to share my screen with you. Share my screen with you. Can you see the words there? I'm going to read the words to you. Then I'm going to let you hear the music. It says, "O Africa, God has shined a light from heaven upon thee. O Africa, you are the native land of all humanity. O Africa, all your children, far and near, will be free. O Africa, God has favored you with wealth abundantly. O Africa, I will keep you in my heart. Rather, I will keep you in my mind, and I will hold you in my heart, and we shall never be apart eternally." Did y'all see that? Okay, y'all ready? Don't laugh at the teacher, but here it is.
I will keep you in my mind, and I will hold you in my heart, and we shall never be apart eternally. Oh, Africa, God has shined a light from heaven upon thee. Oh, Africa, you are the native land for all humanity. Oh, Africa, all your children far and near will be free. Oh, Africa, God has favored you with love abundantly. Oh, Africa, I will keep you in my mind, and I will hold you in my heart, and we shall never be apart eternally.
And we're done. Questions or comments? Say what? Any?
Jerry,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can hear you, Terry.
Hey, I thought that was a really, really nice song, heartfelt. I mean, is there a way that you can like get that to, it's like, I would write it to like the Africa people, like dear people that run Africa. Seriously, just to, it's a good tribute. It's pride, it's validation. I mean, I don't know, people TikTok stuff, but I wouldn't just leave it in the little girly clan. I mean, I think it's very concise, and I think it would be appreciated by more than just us that's in this class. So I wouldn't keep it all like, you know, it's out. The secret is out. I would just, God put it on your heart. He put it on your heart for a reason.
No, I feel you, and it was meant to be the culmination and the summation of all the material that if you look at the words, you know, God has favored you with wealth abundantly. How many times have you heard me say that in the class? And all your children far and near, that's the people living in Africa and us, because we're the far part, will be free, because we're not totally free. So I get it, and we do have plans to do that. Actually, that is, we're working on that. But I wanted to share it with you. It's not completely edited, but I did want to share it with you because it was developed for this course, and in its more refined and perfected form, it will be put out.
It's on spot to go with the course. If you were there from start to finish, that those things was covered, and about the land, the wealth, the people, and the being free, as you just summarized. Like, I believe that we're in the part of a big plan. We're not at the end. We're here because we're part of that on down the road end result of what he plans for us. So
Right.
I just want to say that. I'll let somebody else chime in, but that was just cool. That was just really, really, definitely should not stay with us. But
And by the way, that was Brian singing that song.
yes, I kind of recognized that voice. Yes, I did. I saw that. I heard it. And that just together, that's just a good team. And however you refine it, I think it's going to be well received. I think it would be well received beyond this circle right here. So, all right.
All right. All right. Hey, blessings to every one of you. Thank you for participating. Let me tell you quickly. It's all of this is going to be on YouTube. Every lecture is also on Freedom Ministries Facebook page. Share it. That's the thing that we can do. Brooke is going to send the email out. A couple of people have said we need to do this once a month. I'll get with the pastor and we'll circle back and talk about how we can maybe further develop this. You guys, unfortunately, we crammed a lot. This probably is enough material to get through a semester. I intend to do it in other settings. So unfortunately, you guys were the guinea pigs, but you were also great students and great participants. Thank you so much for your enthusiastic involvement. Brother Nate, I'll holler at you in a minute. Everybody else, be blessed. Oh, I wrote the music. Meaning, when I say I wrote the music, it's kind of a misstatement. Literally, that song came to me as I was sleeping. So in the middle of the night, you know, so as to not forget what I was hearing, I put my iPhone to mouth, mumbling and bumbling, and then I sent it on to Brian, and then this is what he wrote. He wrote the music, actually. He wrote the music. I guess I would say I came up with the melody. Brian wrote the music. Brian is the expert in this. Okay, so if that, I'm not trying to take credit for something that I didn't do. He's been gracious, and you guys have been gracious. We need to get this information out. I agree, Terry, and it would be my privilege and it is my expectation to share the simple melody with Africans at some point, to share it with Black people at some point, because it's meant to be an honor or an homage to reverse what has been put in our minds, to not like Africa, to be shame of Africa, to think that Africa is cursed. No, God has shined a light. What kind of light? Intellectual, academic, philosophical, you name it, in every respect that we can think of light, God has shined that on Africa first. So be blessed. It's time for the end of the course, and we'll talk with you guys soon. Look forward to see you later and discussing this and other interesting topics with you later. Be blessed.